The White House says talks with North Korea are moving more quickly than expected. President Trump and Kim Jong Un will meet in just a matter of hours. The U.S. is demanding total denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and North Korea wants security commitments that America won't try and overthrow the regime. Ben Tracy is following the latest in Singapore.
This is by far the furthest Kim Jong Un has ever traveled since taking control of North Korea in 2011. Now, that is a sign that he feels confident in his grip on power back home, but making a deal here in Singapore is also a risk. North Korean state media triumphantly announced Kim Jong Un's trip to Singapore Sunday, calling it an historic foreign tour and showing pictures of the young leader waving as he left Pyongyang. He flew on an Air China 747, a not-so-subtle reminder of North Korea's strongest ally and trading partner. In Singapore, about a dozen bodyguards jogged alongside his motorcade on its way to the St. Regis Hotel. Kim Jong Un met with Singapore's Prime Minister, and yet another moment making him look less like a pariah and more like a politician. But is he actually willing to give up his nuclear weapons and bring stability to a region where North Korea has long been a threat?
This is risky. What Kim Jong Un is doing is without precedent.
John Delory is an expert on Korean affairs at Yonsei University in Seoul.
The North Korean system is predicated on hostility. And what Kim Jong Un is doing is he's going way out of that comfort zone. And he's saying, you know what, we can reconcile. We can reconcile with our ultimate enemy, with the United States.
Many North Koreans live in poverty and suffer from food shortages. Kim Jong Un has promised to transform his country's economy and is looking for foreign investment to even make it a tourist destination. All of that is nearly impossible under strict international sanctions, which is why the North Korean leader needs more than just a photo op with the President of the United States.
He's got to show that he's a world statesman. He's got to be able to message that back to North Korea to say this was a win for us as a country, as a regime.
Now, Kim Jong Un may want relief from those international sanctions, but that's unlikely to be a result of the summit here in Singapore. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says those sanctions will remain in place until it is verified that North Korea has denuclearized. Meg?
Ben Tracy in Singapore, thank you. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News senior global affairs contributor Ian Bremmer. He's also founder and president of the Eurasia Group. Ian, thanks for being here.
Sure.
Let's talk about the summit. Here we are on the eve. The main goal is denuclearization of North Korea. What's the reality of that?
It's very hard to imagine that the North Koreans would actually give up the one thing that has gotten them the attention and the ability to negotiate with other countries around the world, right? But I think if this summit's going to be a success, and I think it probably will be, we will see some mention of denuclearization from both sides. What exactly that means, is it vague? That's an open question. How long it would take to move on that process, how significant it would be, that's an open question. But there are lots of things that we can see happening well before we get to North Korea not being a nuclear power.
Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he just held a press briefing, and he stressed the denuclearization. I want to play a little bit of the sound from that. I want to get your reaction to that. Let's listen to that.
In light of how many flimsy agreements the United States has made in previous years, this president will ensure that no potential agreement will fail to adequately address the North Korean threat. The ultimate objective we seek from diplomacy with North Korea has not changed. The complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korea Peninsula is the only outcome that the United States will accept. Sanctions will remain until North Korea completely and verifiably eliminates its weapons of mass destruction programs. If diplomacy does not move in the right direction, and we are hopeful that it will continue to do so, those measures will increase.
He's calling this the only outcome the U.S. will accept. Is this an ultimatum on the eve of the summit?
Not really. I mean, look, Pompeo's done a good job in keeping things pretty stable, but it's not as if Trump is following the drumbeat of Pompeo. As you know, it goes the exact opposite way around. What Pompeo said there's actually, I think, wrong on one point, which is that he said there will not be any sanctions relief until there is actual irreversible denuclearization. that's kind of a non-starter, right? I mean, I think that when Trump sits down, he wants this to be a good summit. He's gonna want, in the same way that he gave the summit and the symbolism and the trappings that sort of all entails to the North Korean supreme leader, he's going to want to put some economic goodies on the table well before you are talking about getting rid of nukes and sending in inspectors to ensure that occurs. I can imagine the North Koreans, for example, promising to make permanent their suspension of ICBM and nuclear testing. I can imagine them saying that they would actually get rid of their ICBM program, so they would no longer have the capacity to strike the continental U.S. That's been a very important issue for Trump. It's not what Pompeo was just talking about. But the person that's going to be in the room one-on-one to start is not Pompeo. It's Trump. And he is not containable. He's not really even manageable. And so as a consequence, I would take what Pompeo is saying as some aspirations by the people that are trying to give Trump his talking points, which he will steer away from as soon as he gets in the room.
You just mentioned that he's not manageable. We just saw the end of the G7 summit.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to that? How is that going to affect everything going into this summit?
It was bad, in one word. 2 words would be very bad. This is by far the worst foreign policy outing that Trump has had. He did not want to be there. Doesn't like the environment, doesn't like the multilateral organizations, sees them as constraints. Already had challenging relationships with many of the leaders around that table, most particularly German Chancellor Angela Merkel. He had a good relationship, at least a working, decent relationship with Macron, the French president, before this weekend's meeting. He managed to do a lot of damage to that, did a lot of damage to the Trudeau relationship, which had been at least personally okay before this. He leaves the G7 petulant, angry, had an outburst as soon as he got on the plane and said, "That's it, I'm ripping up the communique," and I was stabbed in the back by Justin Trudeau, who did absolutely no such thing. I mean, just objective reality. Trudeau said that he was going to respond to the U.S. tariffs, as have the Europeans, as have most American allies all over the world. They did not capitulate the way the South Koreans, the Brazilians, and the Argentinians have. That deeply offended Trump, who said these allies have no choice but to listen to me because I'm much bigger, when they chose not to. Added on to that the fact that he had to sit there for a day and a half and listen to conversations that he has no personal interest in whatsoever. At one point during a translated conversation from French President Macron, he even took out his translation device, didn't want to even hear what was going on. That tells you all you need to know. Well,
he wants to be at this summit. But how about if he reacts in a similar manner? I mean, what kind of risks are we talking about here?
The risks are higher. Because it's certainly because Trump has no impulse control, right? So we've seen with the firing of Comey, and we've seen this weekend with Trudeau, that when Trump gets angry, he does things that feel satisfying to him in the moment, which almost immediately afterwards cause all sorts of problems for him personally and for the administration. I mean, the 2 biggest own goals of Trump so far as president have been his inability to contain his impulses with Comey domestically, and the Mueller investigation as a consequence, and now with his closest allies at the G7. It's certainly possible that happens with North Korea if Kim Jong Un says something that sets Trump off, and he says, "I'm the American president, you can't talk to me like that. You're going to do what I say." Right? But I actually think because Trump was going into the G7 angry, didn't want to go, hated it, it's all about what's in his head. And Trump's ability to hear what he wants to hear is actually very high. Trudeau didn't say anything to set Trump off, but Trump wanted to hear. He was already angry, and so he was set off. Whatever Kim Jong Un says, Trump is coming to Singapore wanting to hear a good message. They've set up all of this pomp around an unprecedented meeting between an American president and a North Korean dictator. It's never happened before. Trump is making history. He's going to hear that.
he's going to be making history, but will we hear anything about human rights violations? And why aren't we hearing more about it going into the summit?
Why should we? I mean, when Obama was and when Kerry were directly negotiating with the Iranians about their nuclear program, they weren't talking about human rights. The State Department still put out its report deploring Iranian human rights, and the State Department will still put out its report deploring North Korean rights. But if you want a country that can walk and chew gum at the same time, and there are many legitimate criticisms that the Trump administration has not been able to do that, in this case, you actually want them to be able to talk to the North Koreans on the issues they are discussing, and not the fact that they are the most repressive dictatorship in the world. One other point is, if you were to have a deal, and if you were to actually reduce economic sanctions on the back of that, that would accomplish a lot more for the lives of the average North Korean citizen than any amount of blandishment against their appalling human rights practices would accomplish.
All right, Ian Bremmer, we have a lot to look forward to on the eve of this historic summit. Thank you for just breaking it down for us. Appreciate it.
Yeah.